What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown. On Saturday, June 5th, it was announced at the Bitcoin conference that El Salvador is set to become the very first country in the world to declare Bitcoin legal tender. This could potentially go down in history as one of the most monumental and pivotal points in monetary policy around the world. And so today in this video, we are going to look at what are the advantages for a country like El Salvador declaring Bitcoin legal tender, what are some of the disadvantages, because there are some disadvantages, and what are the implications for Bitcoin, and what will other countries potentially do in response. Ready? Let's dive in. This week, the president of El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele, and I have no idea if that's the right pronunciation, so I apologize for butchering that up front. He's submitting a bill to Congress to make Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. Now, you might be thinking right there, just hold up, because that means it hasn't happened yet. Well, we need to take a step back and look how politics has been working in El Salvador recently. President Bukele is 39 years old, and he has recently led basically a populist movement and political uprising in the country. It's been violence-free, but this is the first time, maybe ever, in El Salvadorian history that I know of, where a president has been elected from a new party without the help of the other two normal parties. And he is extremely popular in the country with an 80% approval rating. He's also one of the most popular politicians in Central America. And because of this, his party now actually controls their Congress. Further than that, the central bank within the last couple of weeks has been changed, and the rules have been made so that it is now basically under executive control, which means that if you're questioning whether this is actually going to happen or not, it's basically a done deal, just hasn't been put into writing yet. Now, your second thought, as I describe how politics has been working in El Salvador recently, might be, hey, that sounds like an authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorship coming into control. And you're not alone with that thinking. In fact, in light of some recent political movements that have happened, where the president, in a public effort to crack down on corruption, replaced 5 members of their version of the Supreme Court, it's called the Constitutional Court there, and replaced the country's attorney general, prompted the United States to take a look at this and say, hey, we need to rethink all of the money that we're sending to El Salvador. And so the United States has pulled funding for their national police and rerouted it to some different areas in El Salvador, which is a perfect segue into one of the reasons why El Salvador would be making a move to adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. Many nations, just like El Salvador, are at the pure whim, just the mercy of the Federal Reserve in the United States and what they decide to do with the dollar. If a country like El Salvador uses the dollar, and then the money supply, let's say, increases by 30% in a year, a little over a year, and people and institutions that are in America get handouts and checks from that increase in monetary supply, but the people using the dollar in El Salvador don't get any stimulus checks, their only result is that their cost of living went up and they didn't get any of those checks. Further than that, you're still subject to sanctions. If you don't play by the rules of the person who makes the money, they can just take the money away. They can stop you from using it. Now, obviously, many countries around the world are familiar with sanctions, and that's why those countries have actively been trying to de-dollarize over the last couple of years, couple of decades. But there's always been the concern of, hey, if we stop using the dollar, well, then we're probably just going to have to use our own fiat currency, which our people don't trust because we're not a very trustworthy government, and we would just print out way more than what the rate that the United States is printing dollars at. And we could use the currency of another country that might have a more stable currency, but nobody else in the world really wants to use that currency. And so we're kind of out of luck here, which presents one of the biggest advantages that a country like El Salvador has by adopting Bitcoin, is that you are not subject to the control of any central bank, of any central government around the world, for what happens to your currency. The people don't have to have any trust in any government, whether it's their own or another, to determine the value of their money. Now, another advantage that El Salvador has here with making this move is specifically because of what goes on with its population and money right now. Millions of family members of citizens of El Salvador live in the United States and send dollars back home to family members there. But unfortunately, that process is clunky and very expensive, with middlemen taking up to 20% cuts in order to get that money back home. This means that if people start sending Bitcoin back home to their family members, Number one, it's far easier. Number two, you cut out the middleman. Number three, you cut out those hefty fees along the way. This means that just by being a cheaper and an easier option to send money back home, El Salvador could quickly become the world capital of Bitcoin. Further than that, they're a prime test subject for something like this simply because 70% of El Salvadoran citizens do not have bank accounts. And here's where I want to talk about something called technical debt. There's something called technical debt that when you're developing an app or writing software, writing code, you have two choices many times on how to do something. You can do something that is more of the right way, that will take much longer for you to create and produce, but will last much longer. It gives you the ability to scale on that. The other way is to write it quick with some cheating and some workarounds and make your infrastructure work for what you need right now. That way you can get the snowball rolling quicker, but you know you'll have to update it later on. As that choice is chosen more and more often, you build up what's called technical debt, because at some point you're going to have to go back and pay back all of that borrowed time that you borrowed from the future and rewrite everything so that you can scale up into the future. It's the exact same thing as if you look at things like infrastructure, like electrical and utility grids around the world. A place like Mexico City technically has plenty of water, but their water infrastructure is so old that they lose about 50% of their water just through the pipes as it gets out to everybody, and everything is built on top of it, so it's virtually impossible to go in and redo and rebuild that entire infrastructure. Whereas if you look at a country like Israel, who their infrastructure was built relatively recently in world history, even though they live in an area that has very little drinkable water, they've been able to build their infrastructure with new technology to the point where they have zero leakage in their system, and as soon as there is a leak, their systems actually tell them where it is and where they need to go to fix it. They have desalination plants, and now they're actually a water exporter to the region. Another example is telephone and cell phone communications. In most advanced Western countries, you have legacy systems of telephone cables and wires running everywhere, and you're constantly revamping and having to fix and update a legacy old system. You've got a lot of technical debt built up for your infrastructure, whereas many countries in Africa right now are skipping straight over that and just building out wireless networks. So why am I bringing this up? Well, 70% of people in El Salvador do not have bank accounts because the legacy banking system is an old, outdated, archaic, useless system for the future of how money is to work. And so if Bitcoin is the money of the future, nobody needs legacy bank accounts. You just download a wallet on your phone, and your phone is your bank. And in fact, an app that was launched in El Salvador recently called Strike has been the #1 downloaded app in El Salvador this year, which means essentially that adopting Bitcoin as legal tender is bringing financial services and modern banking to people who never had access to financial institutions or banks before. From the vantage point of being competitive globally, this is potentially a monumental move for El Salvador. And it's not like we don't have examples in recent history where small, uncompetitive countries with no natural resources have been able to completely turn themselves around and become hubs of global wealth and prosperity simply by trying out a little freedom. Prime examples are the United Arab Emirates and Singapore, and even China has elements of that. And so for a country to adopt a currency that nobody can control and give their people economic freedom with something that contributes to 50% of every transaction that takes place. Money is the other half of every transaction that takes place. You set the stage to allow your people to thrive. And I know it's a gamble, I know it's an experiment. I'm not saying that any of this is set in stone and virtually guaranteed to cause prosperity. Because while it's not good to send dollars to El Salvador and have 20% cut out, it also isn't good if you send Bitcoin to your family members in El Salvador and overnight the price drops 20 or 30 or 40%, which happens. And El Salvador is ramping up the global currency war here. Because there are many countries that don't like the dollar, many countries trying to de-dollarize, many central banks around the world are hoarding and stockpiling and accumulating gold, and many other countries are experimenting with their own central bank digital currencies. But it changes things even for Americans who have no ties to El Salvador. Number one, it makes it harder for countries to ban Bitcoin. Because for the United States to ban Bitcoin, that would mean that they are now going to ban another country's currency, which has never been done before. Further, it puts pressure on the tax code because right now, in the United States at least, Bitcoin is classified as property by the IRS, not as a currency, which means if you sell it, you have capital gains. Which, by the way, since the IRS classifies it as property, that means you can 1031 exchange it and defer those gains into something like a rental property. I'm not a CPA, don't take my word for it, work with a tax advisor, make sure you're doing it right and make sure you're not skirting any tax laws. But it does put pressure on countries all around the world to recognize Bitcoin as a currency and not as property or a collectible or something else. And further, if this works out well, if there's any benefits, any net benefits whatsoever for El Salvador, like, I don't know, potentially a massive inflow of wealth as Bitcoin gets transferred into the country, it could very well open up the doors for other countries that are in similar positions that are reliant on the US dollar but not actually getting any big benefits out of using the US dollar to do the same thing in their countries. So in conclusion, the global currency war is heating up yet again. El Salvador may be a tiny country with many poor people, but there are lots of countries just like that all around the world. And adopting Bitcoin as legal tender opens up the door to the potential that they gain a massive competitive advantage globally and start to attract enormous amounts of wealth. It's happened many times throughout history as countries with no competitive advantage try something, give themselves a little bit of freedom, give themselves a little bit of competitive advantage, and they start to attract massive amounts of wealth for their people. Because wealth goes where it's treated best. And if this is any indication of where the country is headed, then it could be a turning point in monetary history, potentially even marking the beginning of the end of the reign of the US dollar. Now, if you don't own any Bitcoin yet and you would like to, and if you would like to buy Bitcoin without having to worry about paying any taxes on any gains, you can do so through an IRA, like with iTrust Capital. I use them, I love them, they're very easy, very cost effective, and highly focused on security. If you've ever dealt with self-directed IRAs, you know they are a pain, and iTrust Capital makes it extremely easy. So check them out, I've got them linked in the description below with a month free for you using my link as well. As always, I really appreciate you guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.